back to SuiteScript Stories. This is hosted by Salto. My name is Eric Grubaugh, and I am joined by my delightful co-host, Tim Dietrich, today. And we're both here to talk to Sonny Spencer. Sonny, I'm going to let you introduce yourself.
Fantastic. Thanks, Eric. And hi, everyone. My name is Sonny Spencer. I'm Director of Finance Operations with Viva Systems. I've been with the company a couple of years now, really overseeing all things finance transformation. And that includes a lot of work in the NetSuite space. I started my career in public accounting in the UK, where I worked for BDO. And that was really kind of my first flavor for systems and system implementations. Really worked with companies, small and large, building out their back office, as it were. So that was one of the offerings that our department managed with our customers. And that was a great kind of learning experience for me, getting up to speed, not only on the accounting side of the world, but also on the system side. And then what was really interesting, I moved out to the States back in 2013, joined a small company in the Seattle area where I'm based, and was thrown right into a NetSuite implementation there. So that was kind of trial by fire, as it were, and haven't looked back. So happy to share more on that journey as well.
Trial by fire, the most relatable NetSuite story.
I completely agree. So someone should write a book.
Yeah. Okay, before we get too far into it, as I mentioned, this episode is hosted and sponsored by Salto, who is not a consulting company looking to sell you services. They have a powerful DevOps platform built for NetSuite developers to manage, track, and deploy your changes across multiple NetSuite environments. So if you want to learn more about Salto, check out salto.io. Okay, now back to talking to Sonny. Yeah, I guess tell us a little more about your journey. Tim, I know it's your favorite question and I'm stealing it, but after that initial trial by fire, what made you stick with NetSuite? What happened after that?
Yeah, so again, I was thrown right in, found myself as the NetSuite, and at the time NetSuite Open Air administrator for a smaller company. And then once I transitioned away from that role, I was still on the finance and accounting side. So I was an accounting manager and then a controller for another smaller company in the Seattle area. And at the time, they were using a different product. And having used NetSuite, and again with that trial by fire, felt like I knew the platform, I knew the product pretty well and what it could offer, especially smaller companies where it is so flexible and you can cater the system to your business needs. So we decided to go through a NetSuite implementation, and we took that from start to finish. That ended up working really well for that company. We saved the company a lot of money. We had more efficient processes. We went from many different smaller applications that we were managing and integrations down to kind of one suite with minimal integrations. So that was a great experience there. Still in the finance world. And I think going through that NetSuite implementation journey at a smaller company where you do have to be very hands-on, even if you're in kind of the finance team, I kind of realized that I wasn't getting my job satisfaction or as much satisfaction from being in that kind of that controller role, that closed cycle, audits, tax, all of that fun stuff. And I really found that I was getting more satisfaction engaging with the business, understanding their requirements. How can we leverage the system to make their lives easier? And so when I kind of landed on that, I made the decision to, at least briefly, step away from finance and accounting and move towards more of a traditional IT role. And that's when I took a role at Avalara. Kind of worked my way from the ground up, joined their NetSuite team. And they were already using NetSuite at the time, had implemented it, but were looking to expand upon what they had already built. So that was definitely a whole new challenge for me. I knew I wanted to build that skill set up, as it were. they're a publicly traded company, so there's a lot of controls. You know, I write a lot about user roles and permissions and things like that. I think a lot of that comes from my Avalara experience, where we really had great controls, processes and procedures in place. And then I think, you know, towards the end of my journey at Avalara, I really, and through, honestly, some folks that inspired me during my time there, I realized that at least the skills that I had built up weren't just applicable to NetSuite, but more broadly across financial applications. And so I found this role at Viva Systems where I could really leverage that kind of finance and accounting skill set and combine it with the kind of IT and system side of things, and bring it together. And so that's where I kind of term it as finance transformation, and involved, you know, not only in NetSuite projects today, but many other different applications. So that, in short, has been the journey so far for me.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you about, you know, like how important was your accounting background to what you're doing now? And it sounds like it kind of went in phases, but now it's like it's sort of gelled together, right? You can't separate the two, if I'm hearing it correctly.
I think so. I think, you know, over the years, talking to recruiters and what have you, it would seem that it's more of a niche skill set to really deeply understand the finance and accounting side of the world, but also understand how that relates to the system architecture and how NetSuite functions behind the scenes, and being able to translate that. So I think I've referred to myself in the past as a translator. So when I engage with the finance and accounting teams that I support, I'm able to take that, right, between kind of the developers who are talking the NetSuite talk, and then the finance and accounting folks that need to understand that with the things that they're working on, being able to kind of digest what the more technical folks are talking about, and then phrase that in a way that makes a lot more sense to the finance and accounting folks.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful and useful skill. A quick question about your work at Avalara. Like, it sounds like you helped them implement NetSuite for their business, but were you also involved in helping them with their product and service for NetSuite customers? Did you handle any of that part of it?
No. I mean, Avalara is a big public company, right? So they have a whole, you know, separate arm of product developers. Yeah. So unfortunately, wasn't involved in that part of the business. It would have been very exciting. You know, they're doing a lot of good things right now. There was a big announcement at SuiteWorld as well. So they're definitely deepening their partnership with NetSuite, which is great to see. Yeah. But I was strictly on the internal kind of operation side and their use of NetSuite as it related to their kind of back office.
Interesting. Was that your first experience with NetSuite in like a multi-subsidiary, multi-currency? I mean, was it your most complicated instance, or at that point, up to that point?
Definitely the most complicated instance, but again, going back to that trial by fire, it was a NetSuite One World implementation. So we had, you know, albeit a small company, we had subsidiaries overseas, different functional currencies we had to manage. So definitely from the beginning of my journey, really had to very quickly get up to speed on, you know, all of that fun stuff, the consolidated exchange rates, how did the financial reports really work behind the scenes. And that was the case for the next implementation. It was again a smaller company, but they had operations overseas, so I was able to apply that. And then fortunately with that backing, was able to apply that at Avalara in a far more complex environment.
Yeah, it really does sound like you had a trial by fire. I mean, that's impressive, and you survived, obviously. So, and you're still here talking to us
unscathed,
today.
Not without the scars, Tim. But yes.
Yeah, we all have them. Interesting.
So you just got back, fast forwarding, you just got back from SuiteWorld. You were a speaker And I would love to hear about that sort of experience, the sort of the application or proposal process to all the way to delivering and after the speaking process. I'd love to hear more about that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, it was at least my fifth, if not my sixth time applying to be a speaker. So it's something that I've always wanted to do and have been very interested in. NetSuite has put on some great speakers in the past that have inspired me. I think that there was a guy, I think it's Matthew Gugamos. I think that's his name. And he is NetSuite's NetSuite administrator, or he runs that team. And he's done some fantastic talks. So after hearing him a few years ago, I really wanted to do my best and submit sessions that I thought would be helpful to a broader audience. So in terms of the sessions that I've submitted more recently, it's been kind of broader topics. In fact, the session that I had was all around how you can leverage NetSuite out of the box to better manage your audit process. And so there was, folks from publicly traded companies that may be looking to IPO in the future, that sort of thing, that were very interested in that session. So I definitely found success submitting a session that spoke to a broader audience, whereas I think in the past, I had less success wanting to talk about a specific solution that I was very proud of, or very proud of the team that we had built and delivered, but that wasn't quite, I think, what the team was looking for there. The process itself, Eric, was great. I got partnered with two fantastic, well-versed speakers, Frank Vukovitz, who's with FastPath, and then Ray Gerlin on the NetSuite side. So having not done any kind of public speaking before, it gave me a lot of comfort knowing that I was going to be there on stage with folks that had done it many times over. And I guess what was interesting, at least for me, when I was there kind of on the stage, I wasn't as nervous as I thought I was going to be. And I think in part it was because I knew that I had Frank there, I had Ray there. And I think also you need to believe in your content, right? Like if you're going to submit a session, which I would advise everyone to do, make sure you believe in the content, that you understand it, that you're ready for the Q&A. I think it helps with the nerves a little as well. At least it did for me.
So you didn't propose, this group talk, if you will. You got paired with people that were like, how did you pair with them and connected with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to think back. I forget how it was orchestrated, but I think it was suggested back when NetSuite were reviewing the sessions. So I don't quite know the mechanics behind the scenes, but it was proposed that we do a group session. And again, for me, having not been through the process before and have not done any public speaking, I saw it as a great opportunity to partner with another NetSuite customer, learn from them as much as anything. And yeah, it worked out really well in the end, for sure. If I was to be fortunate enough to speak again, I would definitely want to go that route versus doing it by myself. I would say our session was definitely more of an open dialogue. It's interesting, we were planning to do the Q&A at the end of the session, like that's how a lot of sessions run, but we actually took questions throughout the presentation, and it worked really well. It became kind of just this engaging conversation with a larger audience. So yeah, it worked really well.
So your talk was about compliance and being audit ready.
That's right.
Can you give us any high level tips and tricks on that? Like what advice in those areas? If somebody just said, hey, okay, a couple minutes, tell me like what I should know, what would you say?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we focused on was just around being ready kind of real time for changes. So today, a lot of companies need to manage user access reviews. That's a good example. And typically they'll do that on a quarterly basis, annual basis, whatever makes sense for their business. And that's great. And companies should do that without a doubt. But really making sure that folks know it shouldn't just be a point in time exercise. Leverage your saved searches, your reminders, email automation to be notified as and when changes are made. The one piece I did call out was just around submitting NetSuite enhancements as well. I think that was key. One of the enhancements that I submitted way back when was all around getting better access to kind of system notes around role permission changes. And then I think it was with System Notes version 2 that data set was then available, at least within saved searches. So that was huge. At the time for us, we were then able to see exactly who made a role permission change and when, that sort of thing. So that's definitely key, getting access to real-time information, and you can do that using NetSuite out of the box. We covered a few other use cases as well, but I would say that was one that we kept coming back to and trying to drive that message home.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you do often write about roles and permissions, and one of the tips that you recently posted on LinkedIn that I thought was interesting was this idea of grouping roles by role type. Not to get too technical here, but I guess we will. And I thought the example you gave was really interesting, right? It was, I think, AP specialist, and I think you had one role set up that was sort of generic as AP specialist, one with the role name being like AP specialist North America, and I think EMEA. And so I thought that was, I've seen people kind of do things like that before, but I thought it was really clever. The way you described it. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's a great tip.
Yeah, no, for sure. And this was something that we came up with, years ago now. And it was really, when you're operating in a NetSuite environment that is kind of multinational, right? Typically, not always the case, but typically you're going to have finance and accounting specialists within those different regions, and you want to kind of cut them off from the rest of the business, as it were. Hey, you focus on Europe, you focus on North America, you focus on Asia, etc. But at the same time, you want those folks to have the same permission sets within the system, and you want to keep that consistent. You don't want your AP specialist in North America to have permissions and access to do different things to someone in Europe, etc. So what we decided to do was break out those roles by region and then grant them accordingly. And so on any user role, you can set the subsidiary access separate to the underlying roles and permissions. And then what's great, you can run a role difference report within a few seconds. And so you can get that information. Are these user roles identical? Yes or no?
Yeah, the only difference would be the subsidiary in that case, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then for us, Tim, kind of taking that one step further, yes, that was a great way to kind of structure the system from a user access perspective. But then as we had kind of custom development, we were then able to tailor that access to specific roles and regions as well, just by directly referencing the roles.
Yeah, interesting.
And the role types, yeah.
It's things like that they seem obvious in hindsight, but I don't know that I would have thought to do that. Eric, have you ever run across that?
No, not that specifically, but it seems like a really interesting example of like almost inheritance. You think about software, right? You have like classes that you inherit from. You've got this role that you copy into all these different regions and then adjust for those specific regions. It's a really interesting example of like problem decomposition, which is something I harp on a lot. It's very cool. I have not seen that, but I think I have to recommend people do that now. Yeah. I've definitely seen very long involved role lists, but never something quite as organized as that.
Yeah, well, that's
No,
the
for
thing
sure.
I
Although,
see. It's the role names that are just like, they seem like they're a mile long, and you're looking at them and you're like, I have no idea what this person does until you kind of dig into it. And even then.
right. Yeah, so for us, it was key, right? You're working with hundreds of users. And being able to, yes, you may have 100 roles in the system, but if you compare that down to like 15, 20, maybe 25 role types where you know the permission sets are balanced across those different role types, it's much easier to manage and maintain. Especially with new development, you need to add new custom record permissions. You know, it's this group of roles. And you
onboarding new employees has got to be way faster. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
awesome.
awesome.
I would hope so. Right. I would think that just getting a user set up, that alone right there is gonna, yeah, that's got to be pretty awesome. So one of the other things I've seen you
integration.
Yeah, that's another one too, right?
Sure.
You've also written about, and I thought this was interesting because I think it's easy to wait till the very last minute to do it. And that was the importance of assigning roles and permissions and thinking that all through as part of the implementation, as opposed to like that last minute, okay, we've got everything ready to go. And then they're like, well, wait a minute. Like, do we have everybody set up? And what roles should they have? Like, could you talk a little about that?
We can't all be administrators. Oh, no.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, I think most NetSuite customers have that issue, right? Needing to kind of lock that down and limiting the number of users with administrators. So yeah, so for me, having gone through that journey of realizing that having that role type structure works really well, and then just applying that in future implementations. So yeah, roles and permissions should be part of any NetSuite implementation. It shouldn't be an after the fact. And I think where I've found success is it's almost a forcing function where you intentionally limit the access, principle of least privilege, apply that. And then as you go through your testing before you go live with NetSuite, right, you can then figure out where there are gaps. Okay, you need your AP specialist to do this. Oh, they can't because they only have view access when they need edit, that sort of thing. So I think taking that approach, although it might be a bit more painful as you go through testing, you end up in a much better place where you go live, where you don't have folks accidentally deleting things and that sort of thing. So you'll see in some of the articles that I harp on about like principle of least privilege, because I see it time and time again where folks have access to do too much and you need to kind of bring that in.
Yeah. Is that what you see more often, where the permissions are too loose and you've got to tighten them up, or is it more the other way where or is it a little of both?
It depends. I mean, again, I've worked with some big publicly traded companies, so they have great processes, procedures in place. But there, definitely, I see it at smaller companies where they may lean towards, heaven forbid, some of the NetSuite out of the box roles and just using those. I still see that today. So yeah, I definitely see it with those smaller NetSuite customers where. And it's hard, right? Those smaller NetSuite customers, there's a smaller team. Typically, it's going to be the finance and accounting team that have that dual role. Hey, you're the controller for the company. You're also the administrator.
Yeah,
you're
wearing
also
multiple
this
hats.
and this. Yeah, for sure. And let's be honest, it's just more efficient to have that administrator role or have a role that has access to do everything just to get the job done. And I think that's okay. But what I would always recommend, even for those smaller customers, you can have multiple roles. And sure, it's a couple of clicks to switch between roles, but the system tracks that. The system can track that, hey, you made this change in this role. And then in the event of an audit, you can go back to your auditors and say that and say, hey, we're a small team. Here's some of the challenges that we have. This is how we mitigate some of the risks, use some NetSuite workflows for review and approval, that sort of thing.
Oh, Good advice. Eric, do you have any questions? If not, I've got next sort of big one that I think is Pandora's box, but
I've got one, but if you're ready to go, let's do it.
There you go. No, mine's gonna be. We could just talk for another hour about mine.
That's okay. I will take a real quick break here just to say this is being recorded. It will be available on Salto Leap and on Salto's YouTube channel, and potentially in the SuiteScript podcast feeds, Tim.
No comment.
And yeah, if any of you have questions, the Q&A tab is open, and we'll try to address those either as we talk or at the end of the discussion here. All right. Okay, Tim, give us the big question. Let's hear it.
Well, it's not really a big question, but we kind of talked about this before getting started here today. But you had been a part of an article or blog post for Salto. I think the title had to do with NetSuite developers and what should your salary be and something along those lines, which I'm sure no one on this that's joining us here today is interested in. I'm sure like none of us care, right? Being very sarcastic there, but I thought it was interesting. And so I don't even really have a specific question, but I think it's just sort of, let's get the conversation going around that. Like, we don't have to talk specifics about like how much a NetSuite developer should make, because I think that's a tough question to answer. And Eric, I want to hear your thoughts on this too, because I don't know that we've ever really talked about salaries and stuff like that. But what do you think goes into figuring out how much someone should make as a NetSuite developer or an administrator? You know, like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think for me, I mean, bottom line for any role, right? NetSuite developer or otherwise, it's going to be based upon location. So that's going to be key. But I guess one thing that I see in the marketplace that I think gets lost sometimes is the fact that, yes, NetSuite is big. Yes, NetSuite has thousands of customers, but the NetSuite developer role is still niche. And so, in my opinion, garners, in theory, a higher compensation than folks in other areas of development, because not only is it niche, so many companies out there are implementing NetSuite, or they've gone through that implementation and now they're looking to build and scale. And so that skill set is just more and more sought after. So supply and demand dictates that there would be a bump there when it comes to compensation. And I would say compensation, right? It's not just salary. It's broader than that. But that's been my experience, that companies may tend to kind of group developer roles in kind of one big bucket. And I think there should be more thought given to how niche that particular role is and how sought after those skills are when it comes to compensation. Because I would imagine NetSuite customers today struggle if they're looking to bring in their own kind of internal development team to try and get that right, because there is no kind of one size fits all. And sure, you have data that you can rely upon that's region based, but it never really seems to factor in, again, that supply demand, that niche skill set. So that's at least my take at a high level when it comes to compensation for developers and admins.
Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have lots of thoughts about compensation in general, and I'm going to stay off the soapbox for now. But I definitely agree with that. This is still a very small community. You can swing a stick and hit 1,000 Salesforce developers before you ever see a NetSuite developer. It's just a very small community. It's getting bigger, but it's very small. It's very niche. And the problems you solve are maybe not the most technically complex problems all the time. You know, We're not generally not handling millions of hits of traffic and load balancing, all of that type of stuff. Like, we're not doing crazy things like that. But the problems we do solve are very important. We're touching all of your transactions, all of your accounting, all of your reporting. We're touching your GL, and so that has to be extremely accurate and precise. And any mistakes there, especially if you are a large or public company, are massive. And so the attention to detail and quality needs to be on point, and that, I think, demands appropriate compensation. And what's appropriate, I can't say that for any, for any or every company, but I think it demands attention, just like you said.
Yeah, I think you have a good point there. The stakes seem a little bit higher with the kind of work that we do as far as development goes in NetSuite, right? Because of what you said, right? It actually has the potential to impact the business in a way that you could cause some real problems, right?
I think so. And Tim, I would just to add on to that, right? It's not just the impact of the financials, right? A lot, at least in my experience, a lot of the development that's done will interface directly with that business's customers. So you're talking about customer experience now, whether that's a suitelet that you're creating or you're accepting credit card payments, whatever that may be, like invoice automation. So much of that has to be right, because if it's not, you're going to upset your customers. And as a supporting function within the business, that back office, that's the last thing that you want to do. So I think, even more critical, on top of the reasons that Eric already mentioned.
Yeah, I was talking to a Salesforce developer recently, and it was interesting to hear him describe that platform in terms of like how they do their development work. There were a lot of it's a lot of commonality between the way that things kind of work there and what we do in NetSuite. But what struck me as the conversation continued was that the kind of work that he's doing is very different from what we do in the NetSuite world. We kind of go about it the same way, but he's not worrying about inventory, he's not worried about invoicing. It was an interesting conversation. I'm glad I had it because it helped me to kind of understand what they're doing in that world. But at the same time, it made me more appreciative of what we do, the opportunities we have in the NetSuite space. I don't really have any interest in being a Salesforce developer, but I think that's probably as close as we get to being compared to another platform, right? Or just the generic, hey, I'm a JavaScript developer.
Right.
What does that even mean? You brought up location, and so I'll open another mini can of worms here, or mini Pandora's box. Maybe they're nested, but what are your thoughts on working remotely? Because that seems to be a hot topic these days. It kind of, with the return to work thing going on and people pushing back on it, and
So for me, I guess I would say I'm very fortunate to work for a company like Viva Systems that has a work anywhere methodology. So that's, you live near an office, you want to go into the office, go ahead and do that, do your best work. It's really, the mentality is all around work where you're going to do your best work and be most productive. And that resonated with me. And I think, let's face it, the pandemic kind of changed things for a lot of people. And I think a lot of folks on the technology side of things found that they could be productive, or if not more productive, when working in their home environment, and engaging with folks just as we are right now, over Zoom or any other application. So I think it's important for a lot of people. I see folks coming and going now from a lot of the big companies that are, introducing return to work policies, 2-3 days, mandatory in the office. So my opinion is, at least from what I've seen in my experience over the past few years, teams can get their best work done at home, and they can still have that human interaction and travel when that's needed. And that's still important. It's still important to get together and engage in person, without a doubt. But I guess I'm not a believer that everyone does their best work all the time when they're sat in an office working 9 to 5. Personally, I really appreciate the flexibility. I've got a small family at home, so I'm able to, help with the kids in the morning when I need to, and work in the evening when I need to as well, when the family's kind of taken care of. So yeah, for me personally, remote work has been a game changer. And I think, again, just my opinion, I think companies that gravitate more to a work anywhere or remote work policy are going to see success in the future, because they're going to attract more talent. More folks are looking for that. So yeah, that's just kind of my take on the remote work and where we are.
Yeah, Eric, I think I know your thoughts on this, because we were talking about this, I think, pre-pandemic, but I'd love to hear what you're thinking on that now.
I honestly don't have anything to add to what Sonny said. That was great. I feel the same way. It would be maybe impossible for me to go back to working in an office. I have no desire, no interest.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that you mentioned that if you don't have like a work anywhere, work from home policy, that, I'll see if I can word it like this. I think that you increase the pool of potential candidates, right? There are some people who, just like Eric and me, like, I don't want to ever work in an office again. So for a company that will require that, I'm not even going to bother talking to them. But it's just geographically, it's like you totally expand the possibilities of who's going to apply and who you're going to reach out to. And it's, The other thing I would add is that I think the three of us, it sounds like all three of us would prefer to work from home, but I do know people who cannot work unless there's other people around. And I'm not one of them, so I don't understand it, but maybe it's some social thing that they need. I don't know, but there are people who need it. And so, so be it.
No, for sure. I'll say this. I definitely worked with some folks during the pandemic that struggled during that time, right? It was a hard time for everyone. And I couldn't agree more. Some folks need that social interaction. Others have too many distractions at home, so they truly do their best work in an office environment. And I'll say this too, like when I do travel for work and I'm working in the office for a week or two at a time, it does make me miss being in that environment. Now, whether I could do that full time or not, I'm not sure. But I definitely still enjoy working in that environment when the opportunity presents itself. So I wouldn't be opposed to that in the future if that ever became mandatory. But at least for now, I just really appreciate the flexibility that I've been afforded.
So I've been working at home and for myself for the better part of more than 20 years. And then when I first started doing that, the one thing that I missed, well, two things really. One was the excuse to get a good coffee on the way into work, right? There was that. You could still run and get one, but it was something that was like, I don't know, I could justify it more by having to make the trip in. But then it was also the trip back. If it took me a half hour or an hour to get home from work to home, there was that decompression, crank up the music or scream at the top of your lungs, but just get it all out of your system before you walked in the door. And now it's just a matter of me, like, walking out of the room that I'm working in and I'm there, and there's no, like, the decompression time is minimal. So,
well, Tim, have you got any, Tim, you've been doing this for 20 years. Have you got any tips or tricks there? Because honestly, I would value that too.
Yeah, I think that's a longer conversation, and I'd have to really think about it. But I think it's easy to, first of all, the thing that if you're a workaholic, you can literally kill yourself, if you're not careful working from home. because you're never not there, right? So that's a thing.
Yeah.
And I go into it someday as to like, you know, the issues I've had with that, and not being able to stop. So yeah, I don't know if I've got a tip or trick around that, but it's something to be careful of and cognizant of. But I think it's really just about flexibility. You know, like my son, he's going to be 22 this year. So there's never really been a time where he doesn't know that dad works from home and mom does too. Like we both do, right? So he's never seen a family where like he's not used to me not being home. And so, you know, that's kind of interesting, and it makes me wonder what he thinks of work. You know, like will he just gravitate towards work from home, or you know,
Yeah.
I'm interested to see what he does there. But I think the only real tip I can give that I think is kind of, and it's a generic one, is just to be flexible. You know, especially if you do have a small family and you've got kids. You know, you're gonna, you know, you have a call scheduled with a client and your kid's sick at school and you got to go pick them up early. That's your priority, right? It should be. So it's like you need that flexibility, and yeah, that's actually a great. But Eric, we were joking about this before about we always seem to end these calls with a list of like, hey, these are episodes we could do in the future. I think this is one. Right? Like, how do you survive working from home, or do you?
Yeah.
So
You can. Many people do.
yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think it's a great topic. It is late in the episode, but I am going to very smoothly transition us. We just talked about performance, and we did build this as a conversation about performance analysis and monitoring and such in NetSuite. I think you, Sonny, had proposed that topic, so I might let you kick it off then. I know it's late in the conversation here, but let's talk about it.
No, for sure. And we already touched on, you know, some of the blog posts that have been put out there, and maybe one of the other topics that you've seen is around NetSuite performance. And typically, what I see a lack thereof of prioritization when it comes to performance. I don't know about you guys, but for me, you're always talking about the next solution, how we can make things better, and how quickly can we do it. Versus, is that the right thing to do? You know, yes, we can build this great solution that's going to improve process X, but if the back end of that is then going to be, hey, every time your user logs in or accesses this record, it's going to take another second or two to load. And if you're working in a high volume environment, that's going to stack up over time. So for me, one of the, I guess, my tips and tricks for everyone I come across in the NetSuite community is to install NetSuite Application Performance Management. And not only install it and have good intentions, but actually make it part of your development process, right? Actually build something amazing, look at the performance before and after, and take the time to get that right. Again, I'm not a developer. I'm not the person that can tell you how to make it right, but make sure you're leveraging the tools that will point you in the right direction, that will tell you, hey, this script, as a result of this script, your sales order record now takes 2 more seconds to save, right? That sort of thing. So I think as a NetSuite community, we need to talk about performance more. And I think for folks like us, we can make it part of the process where it's not already part of the process going forwards. And again, that's hard to do because we're all running at 1,000,000 miles an hour, right? To deliver solutions and do a good job. But I think a piece of that gets lost is the performance. And let's face it, NetSuite just had their 25th anniversary, right? So there are customers that have been using NetSuite for a long time, or companies that have used NetSuite for the past few years. They're all kind of building up some tech debt, right? Solutions that maybe made a lot of sense 5 years ago and don't make sense now. How many companies are actually going through that process to review their previous architecture? Does it still make sense? How much drag is that on the system today? And in some cases, your business is growing, it's scaling, and you need to upgrade. You need to upgrade your NetSuite license. You need more Suite Cloud Plus licenses, that sort of thing. Sometimes that's the solution, and that's fine. But I would challenge folks to take a harder look at what they've built today, make use of NetSuite APM, and see what they can improve themselves first. So that's really what I wanted to talk about today, and get that out there, get the word out, as it were, that people need to start using this tool. It's a great tool, and what's, even as an admin and not as a developer, it's intuitive to use, right? I can really get to the drill down very quickly to see what's happening behind the scenes. You don't need to be a developer to find where the issues are. So that's what I appreciate about that.
Yeah, APM is a fantastic tool. For anyone not familiar, APM is NetSuite's Application Performance Monitor Suite App bundle. I can't remember which one it is right now. Suite App,
I think it's just a Suite App now.
But gives you a bunch of tools for monitoring different aspects of NetSuite's performance. You can look at individual record types and see how long it takes to load, to save, etc. You can monitor your concurrency to see if you're ever hitting your account limits. You can do so by integration. It gives you a ton of intel on your MapReduce and scheduled concurrency processors. And I've been deeply buried in APM lately, trying to suss out some concurrency limit problems and MapReduce scheduling problems that we've been having. So it's a fantastic tool. And yes, I definitely agree. Every developer should be very well versed in it, especially if you are building bulk processing with MapReduce or RESTlets integrations or user events. So basically everything that a NetSuite developer does.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, Sonny, you bring up a really good point there too. I think it's all too easy to just point the finger at NetSuite and say, oh, that's just NetSuite being slow. Especially like what I see, and I don't know why this is the case, but there seem to be so many customizations around sales orders. And so, yeah, and I'll hear that from clients where they're just like, their sales reps are complaining because they'll go to create a sales order and it's like they go get a coffee and they come back and then they have a little chat with their friend and then the screen suddenly shows up and then you realize that the drop downs aren't populated, whatever, right? That seems to be just like the target for customizations. And again, it's easy to just say, well, that's just NetSuite being slow and we've been on it for years, but no, it's usually not that. There's always some cause to it. And Eric, like I'm going through the same situation where I did recently where, it was concurrency issues with an integration. And yeah, just trying to get to the root of that. Sometimes, we come up with a design for some customization and it looks good on paper. But then when you actually get into it, you start to get the volume flowing. That's when it's like, wait a minute, I didn't think about that. And where I'm starting to get burned. I'm starting to get burned on not being able to, and this drives me nuts, not being able to put indexes on things that I want to put indexes on. So my queries are going all wacky and, that the whole SuiteQL part of that starts to get kind of weird because we don't know what is happening under the hood there. We don't know how the query is being, what the query plan is, if there even is one. So, I think the APM is probably as close as we can get to getting some visibility into those things. So having that in your tool set is a good thing and it's free. So just install it.
100%.
Could not be easier to get up and running. Do you have any advice or like tips or standard uses you have for APM, how you've utilized it, tactics, I guess, for using it?
So I would say the key one for me, and Tim, I'm glad you brought up sales orders, is that APM will tell you which record types and objects to focus on. It will say, hey, here are the top 4 objects that take the longest to save changes to the database, right? So that's where you should start. If you're not using APM today, like Tim said, go ahead and install it. It's free to use. And then start with the records that are the most cumbersome today. And time again, I see it as the sales order object as well, which interestingly is typically an object that will be associated with some form of integration, right? Whether it's upstream, downstream. And so all of that, so all of that time that it takes to create, modify, save a record en masse, it just accumulates, and you can run into all of those governance issues that you mentioned. So definitely go ahead and do that. And then I would even say, putting APM aside for a second, there are just some more practical things that you can do as you're leveraging, customizing NetSuite, right? Whether that's, don't build a saved search that has, you know, 1 million+ rows or 50 columns that are just going to bog down the system, right? Not just for you, but if everyone's doing it, it's going to slow down the system. You know, one thing that we've done in the past has been very intentional around line level customizations. Do we really need this data point on every single line in the system going forwards, or should it really be at the header? Can we get by with that? Just over time, the more line level customizations that you have, it's going to get the system bogged down. It just extends that table more and more. So yeah, I'd say just a couple of practical things there. But yeah, APM, start with the basics, install it, look at those records that are the most cumbersome, and then drill down from there. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, I'm watching the clock closely here, but I think a more maybe developer specific one, admins as well, but almost any customization you build, a script, every script type and workflows have a context field, and you can tell it this script only runs, you know, this script can only be triggered by the UI or by a MapReduce script. Like you can use those to refine the triggers and to really narrow down the scope of when your customizations execute, because way too often all of them are set to all the contexts, and that's almost never the case that you actually want. So being really careful and disciplined and incorporating that context filtering into your design, and being aware of, when do I actually need this script to run? Does it actually need to run every single UI save? Does it only need to run for CSV imports or never run CSV imports? That's a really useful field to have and to master, and to just routinely incorporate into your designs, because it's super helpful in saving you a bunch of time and troubleshooting problems later down the road.
I couldn't agree more. And it's applicable to workflows as well, right, Eric? I see it time and time again. When you create a new workflow, it just defaults to select every context. And I don't see enough folks taking the time to go through and vet that.
We're dealing with that right now, and all our MapReduce script are firing all these workflows that are only like adding buttons to the UI that are irrelevant. And so we're going through some pain right with that right now, which is why it's top of mind for me.
Sure.
Tim, what about you? Let's hear what you've got.
Well, like I said, you know, I'm working on a project right now, and it was one of those things where the design of what I'm working on looked great on paper. At least it did to me. When I say on paper, I don't really mean paper, but you know what I mean. And then when we went live with it and started to get some volume, you know, I realized that some of the queries I had written against the table were just increasingly taking longer and longer. And I thought that we had Oracle under the hood, so I could get away with not, or that it would be smart enough to, I don't know, but one way or another, like I know what the issue is, that I don't have indexes on tables that I need, and I don't really have any particular way of dealing with that right now. So yeah, it's kind of back to the drawing board on that. So it's not necessarily an APM type thing, but I think just as a developer, there are things that we don't think about. Like I've never been in a situation before where I needed to put an index on something and couldn't do it. So if any of you
Yeah.
have database experience, you know, like I feel like not only my hands are tied, but they're tied behind my back, and I've got like a blinder on the front of me, and I'm being pushed into the trunk of a car. You know, it's a bad scene. So,
Some of us are grateful for that. Like,
but you don't need to worry about it.
the responsibility or the power to be able to
But
do that.
once you've had it, it's hard to not have it. Imagine if we
I
said to you
understand.
tomorrow, no more custom fields, no more custom records. Like you'd be like, okay, I'm done. Like, what am I gonna talk to your Salesforce buddies and see if they've got like if they'll get you in over there. So anyway, so should we go to questions or what should we do?
I was gonna ask, yeah. So we've got 2 minutes left on the the official time here. So Sonny, I do want to respect your calendar and make sure you have time, or we can
Yeah,
wrap
I
up
can.
here.
I can run a few minutes over, no problem.
All right, great. Yeah, we do have a bunch of questions that I can get to. I might go in. Let's see. I'll just go in the order I have received them. So anonymous, any advice for a dev that would like to improve their accounting or finance knowledge?
So for me, it would be hard not to recommend the Salto Leap course that I put out there, the Mastering Financial Data. One of the intentions behind that course was for it to be comprehensive and that it would be applicable to the entire user base, whether you're an admin, a finance and accounting user, or a developer looking to get kind of a deeper understanding and knowledge there. So I would start there. And then, you know, one other piece that I'm not familiar with yet would be the new NetSuite functionality, kind of the guided learning. I'll be interested to see how useful that's going to be for folks looking to kind of dig into the system more. I haven't seen that functionality yet, but I'm interested to see where that will take folks looking to learn more.
Mm-hmm. I think I mentioned this on the last in the last episode for some reason, and I didn't follow up on it. There is a PDF. It's actually 2 of them, and I have them. Accounting for Developers 101 and Accounting for Developers 102. I'll try to find a way to provide a link to those. But I think this is why it came up on the last episode. It had to do with, you know, like what makes you a good NetSuite developer. I think having at least some accounting knowledge is critical for what we do. And that was the context for those. But I'll try to, I don't know, get them on LinkedIn or something. I'll find them and then provide links. I would put them on our website, but I've been so bad about doing that, as Eric knows.
But it's a really good point, Tim, because Eric, you had said earlier, which was music to my ears, you know, we need to be concerned about the impact to the GL. And I don't hear a lot of folks in the development side of the house talking about that enough. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. Having that skill set, that understanding is key.
Yeah, 10 years ago, I would not have said that because I wouldn't have known those words or what I was saying. But having been on the wrong end of GL mistakes too many times, it's super important if you are anywhere near any of the transactions in NetSuite to understand what you're doing and what impact you are having on the business you are working for.
I think also talking to whoever is playing the CFO role at the company that you're doing that work for is also critical. Let them tell you what accounts to post to, you know. And Sonny, I bet you maybe that also makes you feel good, right?
No, it does. Don't make assumptions there. Yeah, definitely.
No.
Yeah, always clarify.
Yeah. All right, Ben. I've seen many NetSuite systems become massively bloated with technical debt over time. How would you tackle this kind of system-wide issue with a client or in your own account? That's a big question. It's another full episode topic, but Sonny, I'll let you take a crack at it first.
Sure. I think for me, it kind of comes back to NetSuite APM. start there, see where the system is getting bogged down. Maybe you have this technical debt, but maybe you have these customizations that are still needed today within the business. So start with APM, take a look at the scripts, the workflows, the custom solutions that are slowing your system down. Are they still needed? If so, then you can prioritize optimization. Or if the answer is they're no longer needed, then you can start to look at the deprecation process. So that, for me, at least on the non-technical side, that's where I would be starting with any kind of tech debt reduction process.
Tim?
Just go in all the scripts and disable them, and then just see what people complain about.
See who yells.
Yeah, I mean, don't do that. I'm being
do
funny.
that in Sandbox first. Yes.
Yeah, maybe. I'm not even sure I do it there. No, I am obviously being sarcastic there, but I think we've talked about it before in other episodes. Technical debt it's tough, you know. No client wants to hear that, like, hey. But over time, I think after they've heard you say, look, there's a lot of technical debt in here, you know, it's like it's costing them money in multiple ways. I think one way to avoid it, and this is kind of like probably controversial to some extent, because I think a lot of companies gravitate to NetSuite because it's so highly customizable. But I would say always think twice about that customization that you're going to make. Whatever it is, it might seem really benign at first. I'll just add that custom field. You know, something like you said, if it's on a line item level, you know, so it'll catch up with you over time in more ways than one. The most enjoyable instance that I've ever worked on was one, I think the client has been on it since 2011. I don't know when they started, a long time ago. And they have almost no customizations. It was crazy. It was awesome. It was like just out of the box as it was when they started, maybe a couple of custom fields, and it made doing work in it easy. So I don't know. Again, it's a bigger topic than we could cover now.
I'll offer a couple thoughts, but it's a big topic. Add it to the topic list. Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of context that we would need to understand, but you know, if am I working with a client where I'm inheriting from, you know, someone else or many someone else's, or is this an end user that I work at? Either way, I think the first consideration is, what is technical debt? You have to sort of work that out, and you can't do that without some sort of inventory or assessment of what you have on hand, what customizations are already live. Because you can't understand where you're going if you don't know where you're starting, and you need a definition of where you're starting and what technical debt is. And from there, you can prioritize using tools like APM to understand, like, okay, we have this old user event script. We might need it, we might not. If it's, you know, making the sales order take 20 seconds longer to save, maybe that's a really high priority. If it's not impactful at all, maybe it's a lower priority. So you have to decide what the markers are for technical debt. Just like you would with any project, you need a starting point, requirements, and goalposts before you just start turning off scripts or start converting 1.0 scripts or things like that. Because it's too easy to, especially as a developer, to say, I could fix that, and just start diving in and fixing stuff that maybe doesn't need fixed, that won't have that big of an impact for your client. So there's a lot of responsibility there in treating technical debt with respect like you would a new project. There's one really quickly I wanted to answer in here, and we'll probably go for like another minute or two. And we'll wrap up very soon here. But Garvit asked, any scenarios where we can use class-based object-oriented approach in scripting? I will take that one. Yes, you can. Use SuiteScript 2.1. You get all the modern JavaScript syntax, including the class keyword. Alternatively, I know plenty of teams use TypeScript and other frameworks like that. There's no reason you can't use that stuff for NetSuite development as well. Okay, let's see. I think the last one here is from Vaughn. Any advice on vetting remote workers? What are skills to look for in those candidates?
I think you've stumped us.
That's a tough one. I I think for me, first and foremost, I would start with trying to understand if this is an environment that this person has had success in the past. So have they worked remote before, or is this something that they're looking to try out for the first time? You know, are they experimenting, or are they someone like Tim who's been doing this for 20 years? They have their work from home process down. That for me would be the first thing that I would want to understand. And then by and large, again, just my opinion, the process is the same, whether you're remote, whether you're in the office, you're still assessing, you're still vetting that same skill set for the requirements for the job. Again, whether you're remote, whether you're in office, that shouldn't matter too much, depending upon your company's culture, philosophy around that. But for me, I would want to understand if this is an environment where this person has had success. And if so, then you can check that box and move on to the important stuff.
I think, finding people who have self-discipline is important. When we talked earlier about like the fact that if you're not going to require somebody to come into the office, that expands your pool of potential candidates, geographically, like it could be anywhere in the world. That does sound really good when I say it, but, and you guys may have run into this too, but I'm in Virginia, and it's really difficult for me to take a client, even if it's just a consulting call from a client or prospective client that's in Australia or New Zealand. I've done it before. There's never a good time for both people. And that's just for like a 1-hour consult. So imagine that you're dealing with that person on a daily basis. Maybe that's your developer that's in New Zealand and you're here, right? Like, it's tough. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes it's to your benefit. They're having people that are working in your instance day and night. There's always somebody in there kind of keeping an eye on things, but sometimes it's not. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't know that's so much vetting the prospective employee, but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Yeah, I would agree. You should be very intentional, at least about the time zone that you would want that person engaged in. That's critical. So yeah, maybe you're looking for that kind of follow the sun approach where you have folks in each time zone, and that's what you're looking to solve for. But if you're looking to really closely collaborate with that person on a daily basis, it needs to work. And yeah, Tim, I've run into the same issues with like New Zealand, Australia. It's a challenge.
How to hire.
Keep going?
Another topic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Have we run out of time?
I think I'll wrap us up here. I think we have stolen enough of Sonny's calendar, but we definitely appreciate the time. Sonny, where can people find out more about you? What's going on? Get in touch with you?
Oh, sure. I mean, for me, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I don't use a lot of social media, but that for me has been at least my forum to share with the NetSuite community. That's all I want to continue to do, is just, I think the more we can continue to share, I think, Eric, you said earlier, you can shake a stick and it's tough to find folks in the NetSuite development role or administrator role. So the more we can communicate, connect, share tips and tricks, I think LinkedIn is a great forum for that, and we should continue to do that. So yeah, anyone that wants to reach out, find me on LinkedIn.
Great. Well, we definitely appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Sonny.
Let's bring this. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been great.
Yeah. We'll bring this episode to a close. And thank you to everyone who's joined us live and asked questions and participating in the conversation. We really appreciate it. The recording, as I said, will be available on Salto Leap and on Salto's YouTube channel. And I'm not going to throw Tim under the bus again, but you can add Tim if you want them in the podcast feed.
Hey, nobody's asked me about it, so
good. If you'd like to get in touch with us about the show, you can email me, Eric, at stoic.software, or you can check out Tim's website, timdietrich.me. And if you'd like to learn more about Salto and their DevOps platform, check out salto.io. And we hope you join us next time. Sonny, thank you so much for being here. It's a great conversation. And we'll continue to explore and highlight interesting stories in the SuiteScript world. Thanks.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.